All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to the CX Chronicles podcast. I'm your host, Adrian Brady Chizana. Super excited for today's show. Mr. Dennis Yu, welcome to the CXC podcast, my friend.
What's up, Adrian?
So, guys, really excited. Dennis, most of you probably already know some of the work that Dennis has done. He's got an incredible story. He's done some super cool work across the world. And today he's going to be here to share his journey with the CX Nation. Dennis, why don't you start off today's episode? Just spend a couple minutes setting the stage for our listeners. Give us the scoop for sort of how you got into the world that you're in today with digital marketing, and then talk about a little bit how you sort of built the stepping stones to building your company, BlitzMetrics.
30 years ago, I was an Asian engineer. I guess I still am today. And I was all about math. I was one of those kids that you hated because I would get a near perfect score on the SAT. And I didn't really have any friends. I wasn't social. I barely spoke English because Chinese was my first language. But I found that I was really good at math, and I competed in math contests. I flew around and I did math contests, and I did things like math parties. You know what we do at math parties, Adrian?
What happens at math parties?
Math problems.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I was going to say they probably get pretty wild, Dennis.
And so I was very lucky to have some mentors, like the CEO of American Airlines. And he taught me about systems and processes and operating at scale. And I also was lucky because of what happened with American Airlines. I helped build AA.com almost 25 years ago. I was one of the early people at Yahoo. And so I built the analytics there. And being a search engine engineer, it's about data, but it's also about human psychology of what people are doing at scale when you have more data than anyone else on the planet except for the federal government, right? Yeah. And then when things like Facebook came around, we were also just very lucky to be there in the beginning and run ads. So we spent $1 billion on Facebook ads in the last 14 years, which sounds like a lot of money, but over the last 14 years, it's actually not that much money. And then you factor in what we made as part of that, it's not that much. But what I've learned over all of that, the last 30 plus years, is that systems and processes count for so much. And you say things like people and tools and processes and feedback. And what we've done is collected everything that we know and put it into these training guides. Yeah. And we want nothing more than to teach other people how to win as entrepreneurs and how to systematically do that. So here's our program that's launching in a couple of weeks. It's called the Financial Freedom Movement. So Jake Paul. So if you know who Jake Paul is, he's one of the influencers. Yeah. Right? So this whole thing, and there's videos and all this to accompany it. We have these books that we have. So these are the most popular books on how to do digital marketing or Facebook ads. And it's not because I want to be an influencer or some kind of figurehead or famous. I mean, I have the blue check marks and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
It's because the combination of caring about your people and turning that into training and systematizing that as part of your operations, I think is what a lot of companies miss. When they think about things like CX, they think about consultants. They think about different ways to say thank you. You look at the Ritz-Carlton, these sorts of high-end hotels and programs that they have. But I think it's actually deeper than that. You hear other people like a Simon Sinek talk about your why and how that translates into recruiting and how you have people that reflect the why because you, as the head of marketing or an executive, need to embody that. But I think it's even deeper than that. And for me, I've always wanted to create jobs because mentorship and apprenticeship was so personally valuable to me that I wanted to pass that forward, which is what then caused me to want to write books and do trainings and things like that. And I think when each of us get to the core of that for ourselves and for our companies, the pieces that you have in your book talking about the people and the tools and the process and the feedback all naturally feed each other. Yeah. And that's what I find fascinating, Adrian, about what you're doing.
Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate that. Well, number one, I just think, just in terms of some of the experiences that you had early on in your career, some of the things that you got put some of the problems and some of the teams and some of the challenges you got put in front of must have just been incredibly helpful to give you this really interesting perspective around how you wanted to think about helping to solve some of those problems, how you wanted to build a team
Yeah.
to come together to actually make a big impact. And then on top of it, like, as you already mentioned, it sounds like from a very early age, you were already involved in technology and process and systems and figuring out even how to quantify and make sense of some of the numbers that have to go into this stuff. I think I know for me, a big part of it, you just nailed it, man. Big part of where the 4CX pillars came from was just after being at all of these different venture capital backed startups in New York City, I just kept seeing the same things happen. And it just kept being the same challenges, same friction points, same areas that we were wasting money and not being efficient with the way that we were building a team or building a toolkit. And really that's where, for me, those 4CX pillars were born.
Yeah. Let me tell you a story about what happened to me at American Airlines that I think will resonate. So at American, I was in charge of building the website and buying technology and implementing it because we had a lot of traffic that was coming. This is when things were really just starting to grow, and there's lots of tools we were trying to cobble together. So I was trying to hire people. I had to put processes in place. There's a lot of software that I was buying. You can imagine, right? And you have this new wave that's happening now too, and with AI and whatnot. And I thought that the answer was that I should hire more people, that I should have tighter processes, that I needed to have more machinery, because I did. I had one of the first Sun E10,000 systems on the planet. And we were one of the largest customers of Oracle. You can imagine, right? If you're American Airlines, you can demand quite a bit.
Yeah, I bet you can.
But I had trouble getting my purchase orders approved because the website traffic would grow so fast that by the time the equipment came in, the hardware, that we had planned, we would already have been double that amount of traffic. So we're always behind. And one of the bottlenecks was in purchasing, where when we wanted to buy equipment, we had to put in this financial use case and justify it and run through the finance folks who then have to approve it. And by the time that whole thing, the PO cycle went through, we were already behind. So then I would try to buy extra equipment, anticipating the fact that we were going to run out, right? And so that's the way most people would approach it.
Yeah.
But let me tell you what I did and what happened. And this is not because I'm a genius or anything, but I want you to see how this changes things. So the American Airlines headquarters building in CP5 is so big that if you were to walk from one part of the building to the other, it would take you 15 or 20 minutes.
Wow.
So I had rollerblades. So I would rollerblade along because I'm always efficient and trying to
I like that, man. That's an efficient way to do it.
I'd get to the other side of the building in 3 minutes. And I remember I was going between meetings. I had to drop off a purchase order form for $500,000 of equipment that we needed to order. And I zipped into this lady's office. Her name was Miriam, and she was in charge of processing the equipment and servers and software. And I was going to drop it off on her desk and then rollerblade off to my next meeting. But instead of doing that, when I peeked my head in and I was about to put this thing down in this already large stack, I saw that something wasn't right. I saw that she looked like she was injured or hurt, or just something was not right. So instead of putting that down, I then said, Miriam, how are you doing today? And she told me that her mother just called her with a cancer diagnosis and how that affected her. And her mother was everything to her.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, crap, I need to drop off this PO because I got to get this process. And I'm late for this other meeting, for this technology review that we have. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just ignore that for a minute. I'm going to make those people wait, and I'm going to sit down. So I sat down in her office and I listened to her for half an hour, what felt like an eternity. And I was there just listening, asking her about, and I've never had a conversation with her before. I would just come in and say, where's my purchase order? Is it ready yet? What stage is the thing at? Is it approved yet? Why is it taking so long? Can you hurry up? I need this right now. Like that's how it used to be. But instead I listened to her, and she told me about her mom and how important it was. And I had the purchase order in my hand, and I sort of like put it away because I didn't want to seem like I was asking her for, to do these things. And I ended up not putting the purchase order on her desk, because I just felt like that would just seem really rude after she told me, like, if someone's telling you about some,
absolutely,
you're not just going to say, oh, here's my purchase order, see you later.
By the way, right? You're not dropping that.
For me? Yeah. So I rollerbladed away. I was late to my meeting, but I had someone else who was actually, when you train up a good team, they're able to cover for you. And I have a habit of being late, which is actually not a good thing to build a reputation for.
Even with those rollerblades, Dennis?
Yeah, because in the meeting, you get at the end, you're trying to wrap up, and the people talk too long, and there's no time in between meetings, because people should end the meetings at 55 instead of whatever. I don't want to go my whole thing about how meetings are inefficient and always take an hour and waste people's time. But I remember she told me in our conversation that she liked Hershey's Kisses as her favorite candy. Somehow it came up. So I rollerbladed across the street to CVS, and I picked up a bag of Hershey's Kisses. and I rollerbladed back to her desk and I spelled out her name, Miriam, in Hershey's Kisses on her desk.
That's
That
awesome.
night because I would work late. I worked till like 8 or 9 because I'm in meetings the whole day, and then I'm actually working when everyone's back, right? Because that's what other people, they just go to meetings.
Yeah.
And then the next morning at 9 o'clock, I'm in my office and I hear this rustling and crying and commotion, and it's Miriam, and she runs into my office and she's crying and tears are coming down, and she gives me a huge hug. And from then on, every time I had a purchase order, it was handled immediately. And the other vice presidents were saying, Dennis, what are you doing to get your stuff processed so quickly? How are you getting that stuff through finance so quickly? And I said, I don't know, maybe just treat people right.
Yep.
And I see that sometimes a little moment like that is more important than all the processes and the tools and the technology and the training and all that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of us, when we're so focused on CX, it's often on the heart side of things where there's a story, or it's on the system side of things where it's all about process and software and tools. And there's a beautiful mix of how you bring it together. And I learned that firsthand, because then I developed a reputation with her and with other people on the team that I thought, well, how do I extend what happened with Miriam? So what I did was every week, Friday afternoon, usually, I'd open up my desk drawer and I'd pull out a set of gift cards. And you remember that you'd have these, like Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore, but you'd have these $10 Blockbuster gift cards.
Absolutely, man. I remember those.
Chili's, these $10 or $20 Chili's gift cards.
Yep.
Well, I would pull out that drawer, and I had a stack of gift cards and I had a stack of thank you cards. And I would say, Adrian, thank you so much for that report that you did today for, this other group. That's a good job. Or, thank you, Doug, so much for the software, for getting that software project launched. That means so much. And, for you doing this extra little thing, really good job there. And, here, please take your dinner or your wife out to dinner on me. It's just a small way to say thank you.
Yeah.
And so I did that every Friday afternoon. And I found that just doing something like that, not in a mechanical kind of way, so where people would just expect it, but actually thoughtfully, I think about that made all the difference. So my team, even though it was really small with a couple dozen people, would outperform organizations that have 50 or 100 people because I did things like that. I mean, how would you categorize that?
I think, well, number one, Dennis, that's awesome. I think that the first place my mind goes when you explain that story is just the way that you are thinking about curating experiences that are meaningful and that also have some type of a personal touch alongside of it. That's what gets people to, number one, remember something. But then the other thing too is, to your point, it's not about it just being like a mechanical checking off the box of sending someone, their Friday gift card, but like to be thoughtful about that. But then the other piece too is just like, you clearly were thinking about like EX and employee experience. And you were also at a much earlier stage in your career, you knew that if you had a team of people they felt supported, they felt coached, they felt as if they had someone that had their back. And then there was these extra things of like the appreciation and just like actually like doing something nice for all the hard work and all the effort. That's huge, man. And I imagine that's probably why you and the team were able to outpace and outperform some of the other folks in the business. And I imagine it probably made it easier for you to keep folks retained and on board and on your team and not looking for other possibilities, which makes everybody's job and everybody on the team, it makes their day-to-day a little bit easier, right? And make that stability and that experience is huge, man.
Yeah.
Huge.
Because we couldn't pay very much. So Jane Allison was the head of HR. And I said, people who are in finance or technology, they build websites, they're making 125, 150,000. We're only paying 70,000 a year. We're paying half of what Silicon Valley's paying. So we've got to do something else. And she said, oh yeah, flight benefits. You can fly anywhere on American Airlines. I know that's true, but you also have to show something else that makes people proud of being part of American Airlines instead of just being another pilot. So 100%. We systematize other ways to say thank you to our customers as well as internally. And one of the things that we do to this day, which I think is awesome, I don't see anyone else doing it, is when someone spends at least $100 with us, we send them a pair of socks with their face on them.
I like that.
Can you imagine like getting that in the mail?
I like that a lot.
Normally, what do you get in the mail? Like bills or solicitations or things like that. Then imagine you open a package and it has your face on a pair of socks, and then it has a handwritten note saying, Adrian, it was so awesome being on the CX Chronicles podcast. I love what you're doing with building up your agency, but teaching from the experiences of others. Like,
Yep.
imagine you get that, right?
I
How would you react? What would you do?
Oh, well, first of all, I think it would be incredibly entertaining. It would be incredibly memorable. But then the other piece is just just going right back to it. It's that personalized touch. You're having fun, but it's thoughtful, it's meaningful. There's thinking that went into it. So I think it was an awesome example of things that you can do and some of the ways that you should be thinking about not only your customer experience creation and not the incredible things that you should be thinking about for our listeners, Dennis, that for not just the things you're doing for your customers, but Dennis just called it right out. The things that you should be doing for your team, the things that you should be doing for your coworkers, the things that you should be doing for the folks that you show up every single day to work with. And it really does go a super, super long way.
Yeah, you do it for your team, and then your team does it for your clients. So that way it's consistent. It makes
100%.
sense. Yeah.
Dennis, I'd love for you to spend a couple minutes talking about your business, talk about BlitzMetrics. I'd love for you to give the listeners a sense for who you guys are, what you do. And I'd love to, selfishly, I just want to know, I'd love to kind of hear the story for what got you thinking about getting this business started, getting this business off the ground. And now at this point, I mean, 13, 14, 15 years later, you guys are still killing it. Spend some time talking about your company.
I don't even view it as a company. I view it as a mission where we want to create jobs and mentorship at scale. And I know when I started my career, it was difficult to get a job in tech because you had to have experience. And so it's a catch-22. Who else has got experience building big websites? Well, I do, because I was early on, but I also had a mentor who helped me, who's the CEO of American Airlines. And I thought, how do we scale that up with the current school system? How do we partner with other businesses that want to train up other folks to be able to run their marketing, for example? So 20 minutes ago, I was on the phone with an attorney who is wildly successful, and he's got 16 different businesses nationwide, and he's picking up his $12 million jet, and we're going to go fly on it and have some fun.
Right.
And he said that his goal was to grow his social media and to grow his firm, but he didn't have people in-house to be able to do that. So he was doing it by himself. And I'm thinking, this executive who's doing over $100 million a year is running his Facebook and Instagram and these other pieces by himself.
Yep.
That doesn't make any kind of sense.
Nope.
But he's having trouble finding other people that are certified in how to do it. In the same way that, right, Adrian, you get on a plane, you know that pilot's certified because they went to flight school.
Yep.
You have to go to the hospital and a surgeon's going to operate. They went to medical school, right? Yep. Someone who works on your car, they're a mechanic. They have to have gone through a certification to work on the car. Where is that in the world of digital marketing? And so we want to build that. And we're so lucky to work with folks like Instagram and TikTok and GoDaddy to put that kind of training together. Or it could be, people like Jake Paul, where we put these programs together. And I'd love nothing more than to create the world's largest apprenticeship system to give everybody, even if you're a stay-at-home mom or you're Filipino and you want to be able to work from, instead of the call center, you want to learn how to work on video or whatever it is, you have a place where you can learn how to do it and be able to have a good income doing it as well.
That's spot on, Dennis, but very well said. And I think the other thing too is just going back to your point around building this place where you can not only teach and mentor others, but then part of the education and part of the tutelage, if you will, that's going into that is making sure that they move on forward and they go help the next 5 or the next 10 people. Yep. That's game changing, man. That's game changing, not just for business, but that's game changing for people's lives. That's game changing for people's careers. And then the other thing too, you know what it makes me think about, Dennis? You don't know in that type of a system where you have all of these different people trying to help push each other forward, push each other up, push each other on to the next thing. You don't know which folks are going to come out of that type of a mix. You're going to probably have some people that are going to be so inspired or so touched or so tapped into that whole world that they do go on to build the next Facebook, TikTok, or American Airlines. And I know that sounds crazy, but this is
true. It's happened already.
This is how it starts. 100%. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. A lot of the folks in our program have gone on to sell their companies for hundreds of millions of dollars. People who were children, basically, when anyone who's younger than me is a child. And I'm proud of seeing that. I'm not jealous. I feel like I'm the soccer mom or whatever that's living vicariously, because I see that now I've got friends that are executives at Facebook and Google and GoDaddy and Fiverr and these other places when they started in our program. So the more they're equipped, the more they're going to want to pass that forward, what they've learned. They're going to stick with what's worked for them, and thus they become the best advocates. It's not a Trojan horse or a mole kind of scenario, but that's what it ends up being, because when we teach people and we equip them, they're going to go around and tell everyone what they've learned and where they learned it from, which then builds our program. And thus we never need to to market. We never need to sell. We never need to cold call. So when we got Nike or Red Bull or Starbucks or these other guys as clients, there is no need to get on the phone. They came to us. Every single client we've ever had came to us. Every single speaking opportunity or podcast or article that we've had in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, whatever, every one of those, they came to us, right? You came to me. I didn't come to you saying, I want to be on your podcast.
Yep.
But that's a sign. When you have great CX, that causes the word of mouth, and the social proof takes care of itself. Then all the stuff that we teach in the book, that you teach in your book, right, around tools and people and process and feedback is the result of that flywheel that's moving.
100%. I mean, we talk about all the time, not only on the show, but even with some of our client work, Dennis, is really around, if you take the time to build an army of promoters. And I know it can be hard because there's a lot of companies out there that are supercharging or super scaling or rocket shipping into the future, all these buzzwords that people love to throw out there. But the reality is, the companies that actually take the time to build an army of promoters who absolutely love working with the business, love working with the brand, love working with the team, a service, a product, those people go out and do your marketing for you. And then those people go out and they do some of your customer experience and customer success for you. And in effect, you're creating this flywheel where all of a sudden you've got 100 people going to tell 20 of their friends each. Now you've got thousands of people that are thinking about your business, thinking about your brand, thinking about what you actually offer. Dennis, one follow-up question for you that I just have to know. Some of the brands that you're talking about, these are global brands, these are global businesses. Could you just spend a couple minutes talking, what's it like for you and your team at BlitzMetrics, what's it like having to actually work with these different tools and these different processes? Because these companies are huge. So they've got to have incredibly robust toolkits. They've got to have, I love your playbooks on the, for our listeners right now that aren't watching the video on YouTube, Dennis has got these big chunky meaty playbooks that he's got that him and the team are building. But what's it like to have to kind of work with all of those different tools and all of those different processes when you're trying to deliver some of these incredible digital marketing and digital experience deliverables for your clients?
You would think it'd be super glamorous to work on one of these projects. Like for Red Bull, we handled their social ads and analytics for a few years.
Okay.
And they're operating across 90 different countries. And every one of those countries has a different set of programs and a slightly different product set and different KPIs and a different manager who's in charge of that. So you might think, oh yeah, Red Bull, let's go. We got Red Bull as a client. Let's go celebrate and go have a sushi dinner or whatever it is. And then you realize, oh, wait a minute. How many meetings are there? How many people are you having to keep track of? How much data is there? How many different systems are there? Because each of these different areas has their own system. And then we have to have enough people on our side to be able to interface with the people on their side, right? So if they've got 90 managers, do you think I'm going to manage every one of these relationships with all 90 of their country level managers?
Right, no way, no.
A lot of people think that it's glamorous. So when we're working with Nike and they have 2,500 entities, because it's Nike basketball, football, golf, and Jordan and women's fitness, then you have the entire product line, wide and deep.
Yep.
And you cover Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and YouTube and the website and checking in on Google. You have all these different things across each of those different entities.
Yep.
It becomes an incredible organizational challenge. I don't want to say nightmare. When Nike came to us, they said, yeah, we've got all these different presences, and the Japan team created all these different Facebook, Instagram, whatever's for each of their different athletes and products and whatnot. And the US team's doing this. And here's the different folks that we sponsor. It could be like a Justin Bieber or Lady Gaga. And here's what's going on over here. And we're trying to measure the impact of all of our marketing across all these different channels. And we've bought all the software. It could be Omniture, which is called Adobe Analytics, and Google Analytics, and Hootsuite, and Sprinkler, and all these different tools. And they said, but we still don't know what the overall picture is. We don't know even the size of our audience across all of our different channels. We don't even know how much engagement. We can't even tell you what the number is.
Yep.
We can't tell you what's working or not working. We can't tell you how it impacts sales. We can't tell you when we have a Nike store and people are going to the Nike store, how that impacts their behavior when they go online or they go into a Foot Locker or Dick's Sporting Goods to buy Nike. We can't tell you that. Can you help us put that together? So how would you respond to something like that?
Well, if it's Nike, I would probably say yes. I would have to.
How do you bid that out, right?
Yeah, right.
You say yes, you're not going to say no. So you say, yeah, I'd love to do that for you guys.
Yeah, it would be
but then you got to give them a plan.
Yep.
Right. Like, okay, great. We agree. There's all these people in a meeting. Now we've got to give, we're on the hook because none of them want to be on the hook for something like this, right? So that's why you bring in someone like Dennis and his team. So then we have a week to put together a whole plan that everyone else has to buy off on, that we have to be able to execute on things that we need from them and things that we're going to do in a particular timeline with a cost associated with it, which is north of $1 million. And then we have to know that that reasonably is going to work and do that because of things that we've done for other companies.
Sure.
You know, like a Quiznos or a Starbucks, or even, you know, the local chiropractor, or even the local Italian restaurant that is not a chain but has only one location, right? We take the sum of everything that we know that is documented in here. This is what we call the master presentation, right? This is one of multiple books. It's not just this, it's actually way bigger than this.
Okay.
And we say, okay, of our big recipe book, of all the different things that we've ever done that we've documented, because everything we do, we document how we've done it. And we want to solve this problem for Nike. How then do we take these, think of it as like a pantry or a refrigerator with every single ingredient, every single spice, and every single kind of meat or vegetable or pasta. And we want to create this particular dish.
Yep.
How do we create this dish given the ingredients that we have? And so every time we do a project, we think of it this way as well. So there's this crazy daunting project where Starbucks wants to spend $17 million and launch Frappuccino over the summer, right? Yep. Okay, that's great. Now, how do we break that down into what happens with the campaigns on if it's over 100 degrees, then it's buy one, get one free at your local Starbucks. Oh, we got to set in place the tracking. So we run the ads only in the areas where it's over 100 degrees that day. And we find that the Hispanic audience really likes the caramel flavored Frappuccinos more. So how do we segment the Hispanic members in our audience so they can get this, hey, did you know that we have this salted caramel or, you know, flavor Frappuccino or whatnot? Yep. And how do we balance the ad budget between Google and Facebook? Well, we have some processes on how we do that and how we optimize and how we allocate money. So we have people that are trained on how to do that. So when we have this plan, the recipe of all these ingredients, and then we have people that are trained to do any one of these particular components, then we have people who are, think of them as like conductors across the orchestra, and they're able to make sure that all components in the factory or the kitchen or whatever, the operating room, whatever analogy you want to use, is working properly. Because initially for the first 10 minutes when you get the deal, you're celebrating, you're like, oh, wow, we have Brown Foreman, right? I remember when Brown Foreman launched Tennessee Fire to compete with Fireball and how we wanted to beat Fireball. And I think we did a much better job than Fireball did. I think it even tastes better, but I'm biased. Right?
I mean, it is pretty good, Dennis.
and so there's the initial excitement, right? Oh yeah, I won the deal, you know, but then after that initial 10 minutes, then it's all work. It's all processes. It's all making sure that our people are showing up on time, just like what I learned in the airline. So there's something glamorous about being in the airline because people like the idea of flying, and, you know, people want to be a firefighter or a pilot or a president. So, you know, pilot or working in the airlines, one of those sorts of jobs. But then quickly you realize it's based on reliable, competent execution.
Absolutely.
And in the airline industry, there's something called OSO. Have you heard of this?
No, OSO, no.
OSO is called off-schedule operations. It's the core of how an airline operates, because the weather changes things, or a pilot calls in sick, or there's a strike, or there's an equipment malfunction, or just there's always something that can throw you off. And I know people like to complain about the airline because a flight was late, or they paid too much, or they get charged for bags. But if you look at how complex it is to get a gigantic piece of metal from point A to point B, moving at 0.9 Mach, almost 600 miles per hour, that is an incredible feat of engineering, of logistics, of people, of marketing, and having all those systems come together. So OSO, off-schedule operations, is if something fails, like the avionics fail, there's backup avionics, right? If a flight attendant calls in sick, then there's a backup plan for that to happen. And that's how we think about things, is if something doesn't go right, well, first off, you have to have it mapped out on how it is supposed to go.
Big time. Have it documented.
Totally. And if it doesn't go right, you've got to have what we call hope for the best, prepare for the worst. You have to have another backup process. You have to have backup people. That's why in any particular role, we want at least 2 people who can do that role. Because if that one person's not there, then the whole thing can fall apart. It's a critical failure.
Big time. Big time. I think, you know, Dennis, one thing it makes me think about for some of the folks listening, right? Startup founders, startup execs, people that are building incredible businesses, building tomorrow's leading companies, right? the ability to have contingency planning in place. Dennis, to your point, the backup planning or that off schedule time where you are literally baking in your ability to fix things, to correct items, to replace different people or different parts of the machine. That's mandatory. And if you're not thinking about that stuff and you're focused on the day to day, fine, I understand it, but you have to start creating time to where you and your team can really be dialed in on how you're going to back up or how you're going to fix things when shit does hit the fan, because it will inevitably happen as you're building companies, and it will inevitably happen as you're building teams. It happens every single solitary day.
Even if it's just you might think, well, that doesn't apply to me because I don't have 100,000 employees. Well, guess what? You have to learn to replace yourself.
That's right.
Because I'd ask you, you're listening, you're watching, how much of your time, how many hours per day are you spending doing things that are repetitive, that really, if you documented it, someone else could do? I'd even ask you, Adrian, right? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Of your day, how many hours per day are things that if you had it properly documented that you could delegate out?
There's too many things. And the honest answer is that, it's taken years for me to get to the point where you do regular reviews just to make sure, whether it's once a week, once a day, once a month, whatever your appetite is, whatever your cadence is, you have to constantly be looking for the things that you can delegate off, automate. Here's the other thing. COVID changed everything, Dennis, right? So now there's all of these different offerings and all of these different managed service providers out there that can probably do some of those things better, faster, cheaper than you anyway. And then on top of it, execution's everything, right? So really keeping your time to focus on the things that are the most valuable to you, the most valuable to your business, the most valuable to your team. That's a huge part of getting ahead and creating some separation between not only your competition, but just yourself sometimes, man, just getting out of your own damn way.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's the process that even if they have a process, they've got to have a process to be able to work with you and interface with your process. And that kind of connection I see is where a lot of companies fail when they hire other agencies.
Yep.
Because maybe you yourself, if you don't have your processes documented, but these guys have a process, that's not enough because it's not going to mesh.
100%. And one of the things that we're always talking about in this show, Dennis, too, is just the power of the living playbook, the power of the ability to have someone in your business, someone on your team, someone that's leading the charge, especially with the customer facing side of the business. Things change every day, number one. And then number two, your team ought to be learning multiple brand new things every single day. So if you're not documenting those new learnings, those new findings, those new ways that the team has figured out how to really kind of operate things a little bit smoother, a little bit better for not just your employee, but the entire team, that's how you're getting better. That's how you're improving every single day. That's how you're pushing your business forward. And then the customer, they get that feel. They feel that your frontline staff next to you, they feel that. And it really makes the entire experience a lot more enjoyable.
Everything we do is in a checklist. We don't do anything that's not in a checklist, and our checklists are what we do. So I challenge you, look at your day. Look at the things that your people do. Is every single thing covered by a checklist? Even things that you think are obvious, is it covered by a checklist? If the answer is no, then you're leaving yourself open, because if that person leaves, how are you going to replace that? If that thing fails and some other aspect of the customer experience fails, it's not because that person's bad. It's because you as an entrepreneur or a leader haven't managed the process properly.
Big time. Dennis, as we get ready to wrap up today's episode, I have to ask you, I'd love for you to spend a few minutes talking about feedback. This is one where, and you've already given us a bunch of examples just from some of the businesses that you've been able to work with, some of the brands that you've been part of building. But could you spend just a minute or two talking about what are some of the things that you've learned with working with all these brands about how to not only take the feedback from the work that you're doing for your clients, the work that you're doing with these different teams, but how do you use that feedback to inject it back into the services that you're providing?
Most companies, they give lip service to feedback, but they don't actually collect it. And it's not because they don't want to do it. It's because they don't build in time for it. And most of the executives I know, they're so busy moving from campaign to campaign to the next initiative. They're constantly meetings that they're just off to the next project without having a proper postmortem or even building in the analytics to collect the feedback. One of the things we talk about a lot and we implement for every single client is what we call digital plumbing. Have you heard of digital plumbing?
Absolutely. Yep.
Right? All that, if you don't have digital plumbing in place, and you don't see what's working or not working, you're not even gathering the data and putting all the data in one place, across your email and website and Facebook and all that kind of stuff, then you're not even if you're ready and you build in time to do analysis, you have people who are trained to do analysis. If you don't have that data coming through digital plumbing, it really doesn't matter. We look at people's Google Analytics or their Shopify or their CRM or Salesforce automation system, and we see that their data is so dirty just for various reasons that it really doesn't even matter if you have these analysis cycles. So what we like to do is when we have digital plumbing in place and then all the execution that happens in between is we want to have that last phase, which is optimization. Some people call it the closed loop cycle, but this optimization is what we call metrics analysis action. So it's looking at the data, figuring out what it means, and here's what we're going to do based on it. In the hospital setting, that's collecting the vitals, which is the blood and the, all the x-rays and things like that. And the diagnosis, which is, okay, well, it looks like, Adrian, you have a broken collarbone or whatever's going on. And then the treatment plan is, and now we're going to do this kind of surgery. You're going to take these kinds of pills. You're going to stay in the hospital this long. So the idea of metrics analysis action is something that you do in a regular cycle. It can be a weekly cycle, monthly cycle. It can be a 360 employee feedback. There's feedback on every single level of your business, from the top level all the way down to examining an individual process to see how it works. I think of it like the check engine light, right? In your car. Well, it could be that the oil is low. It could be some fuse is blown. It could be your tires are flat. It could be any of these things. But if you don't have a process and if you don't have it documented, then you can't associate the measurement against it to then determine when something is out of whack. So we put in place what we call triggers in every single business. So if any metric is above or below a certain threshold, that's a sign that something's wrong. So in your car, for example, right? You drive your car and then that orange light goes on because the fuel goes down, it's less than an eighth of a tank or whatever, right? That's a sign you need to do something, right?
Take action.
So it's a rule. It's an if then. So if the fuel is less than 1/8, or I like to refill when I'm, a third or a quarter. Some people, they'll wait all the way to the very end. There might be a gas station for a while, so you don't want to do that,
Yeah, right.
But think about that, the equivalent of a check engine light or a fuel level in your business in every particular metric. So if you're gathering the data properly, accurately through digital plumbing, and then you set these different thresholds on your conversion rate, on your profitability, on people that are giving negative reviews on Yelp, whatever it is you're monitoring for, you put that trigger in place that if this one thing happens, here's one thing you need to look at. It's like an alert on your phone, like, we got to clear my notifications, right? I find that most businesses don't do that. So our view of feedback is when the data is in place, and you know what a healthy metric is, then you can easily set these alerts that then are cleared through the process, because when this alert happens, this person's skilled to fix it, right?
I love
Think about all the things that could go wrong in your business based on your SOPs, and then say, if this happens, here's what we're going to do based on it. And that way it doesn't have to be magic, and it doesn't have to be any of us as whack-a-mole trying to always monitor everything. The Eye of Sauron is trying to, the Eye of Sauron can't watch every single thing that's happening all the time. You've got to have the monitoring in place.
Yeah, I love that. Dennis, I love that. And I want to add one element to that too, is understanding what the lines in the sand are organizationally, because every business is different. Every team is different. Dennis just laid this incredible picture out for us about almost like this dashboard of all these different potential triggers that are telling us that we have to do something or we need to respond. But here's another thought for the listeners too, making sure that folks in your business, on your team, folks that are actually rolling up their sleeves and taking care of business every single day, operating your business, they got to know which of those alarms that Dennis is talking about they need to take action on, right? It's really important to make sure that there's clarity around who owns which triggers and who owns which alerts or which alarms that go off. And that's something, guys, that you got to be thinking about. I would argue most every single solitary day and every single solitary week with your team, because that stuff changes too. Businesses are changing so rapidly today that sometimes those owners can change. And sometimes the people that are actually knighted to take care of those triggers, that changes too as businesses grow, as businesses scale, as products and services change. So awesome stuff though, Dennis, awesome stuff. Dennis, so first of all, this has been an absolute pleasure, man. Thank you so much for joining the CX Chronicles podcast. I want to make sure before we wrap up, where can our listeners find out more about you, sir? Where can they find you? And where can they reach out to you if they're interested in learning more about how you might be able to help their business, sir?
Happy to help and happy to answer questions. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can Google me, and whatever your favorite channel is, you can see me on Twitter, on YouTube, on Instagram, on all those different channels. If you want to send me an email, which I do check personally, that's Dennis@BlitzMetrics.com. And this is what we do. day and night is we train up other people, we collect data, we implement dashboards, we certify folks, we fix problems, we consult, just like you guys. And we want people to make smart decisions based on data instead of randomly trying to work harder.
I love it.
Adrian, it's a pleasure being on the CX Chronicles podcast.
It's our pleasure, Dennis. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll look forward to seeing what you guys do in the future.